we've actually got a lot to talk about, which is always nice. But then there's also the detraction that is the fact this is our only conversation this week, just because of the nature of it. But we couldn't miss out on this opportunity, especially with everything that's going on in the NFL. We, of course, got a Suns basketball team to talk about. And then news that we didn't expect today regarding ASU. So a lot to get into. You ready to go?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it. So we're going to start with the fun news, because I always like fun news. And so to pull back the curtain just a little bit, there's always a balance that has to be decided upon in terms of this particular show, because Kellen and I's goal is to make this live in a podcast digestible space and make it able to last for a while. And so how do you approach a show that needs to live in the now of working on radio and terrestrial airwaves, but then also being able to be podcastable over the course of the next several days until we hit the air again? And the easiest way to do that is to just hit on the top story and not hit on the story that's going to be, for lack of a better expression, dead by as soon as tomorrow. And that's the addition of Josh Sweat. Kevin, they did the thing. The Cardinals went out and they spent money on an outside free agent. It was the one thing that we were all waiting to see if they would do. And by golly, they went out and actually did it.
And hey, it was the guy who was the number one guy at that position, top of the market, had connections to the Cardinals and their head coach. I think people probably thought you're daydreaming a little bit if you thought the Cards would go after him just because of how they've operated in the first few years of this regime. But that's only a couple of years of the regime. They were obviously, breaking down their roster, building it back up from the foundation. And so, look, we kind of got a read on, okay, if they have guys who are JG guys, and apparently Josh Sweat's a JG guy because he got that cash, they're going to be aggressive. And I think that's the big picture relief in this is, look, we can talk about the numbers in a second, who he is, his production as an NFL player so far, but when it comes down to it, it's the Cardinals are not adverse to spending money when they see the guy who fits their culture and their core.
And that's just it, is how can you find the marrying of somebody that fits the culture and the core of what the Arizona Cardinals are and what they want to continue to be, but then also reward the fan base that has been so forever waiting for like a big name splashy addition through spending of money, not necessarily in trades. We've seen them make big trades in the very recent past, even this decade, as a matter of fact. But to go out and spend that money in a large amount, 4 years and $76.4 million, 41 of it is going to be guaranteed. So he's going to be averaging, what is that, just about 20 per year or just under 20 per year. Like it's not a small amount by any means. And for them to be able to do that on the first day too, like they set the tone as one of the aggressors of free agency in a sense by making this move. I'm all for it. I'm obviously optimistic that it's going to do wonders for a defense that has been desperately in need of an edge rushing threat. And Josh Sweat has very much fit the mold of somebody who is an absolute threat on the outside of the defensive line.
Yeah, and you talk about the production. I think it's important to look at the context of what this coaching staff that's mostly returning did with Nick Rellis as the DC. But to me, it's okay. You got a lot out of, even though we said there was no edge rusher, people were hurt, like Ojulari was hurt. Dennis Gardeck got hurt as he was the sack leader mid-season. They got mid-tier pass rush in terms of sack totals, at least. I'd have to look up pressures and different ways to segment how you view the pass rush, but they were middle of the road with like a group that really they didn't spend money on it. They developed those guys, or Gardeck was already there. So to me, it's okay if you do ID a guy who fits your system. By the way, had his best season under Jonathan Gannon. Then you can sell me on overspending if you want to argue that it's even overspending. I don't know exactly if it is. Like the guaranteed money of $40 million, more than half of that is really big. But like, look, again, it's not our money to spend. We can criticize it when it doesn't work out. There's another team in this town that maybe spends a lot of money and they don't get the production out of it. But if it's one guy, we'll see. But I think we leave it up to watching him and see how he does.
Under Gannon in the 2 years in Philadelphia, it was 18.5 sacks and 22 tackles for loss in the 2 seasons that Sweat had under Gannon. So very successful in terms of the immediate counting stats that everybody wants to quickly attach themselves to. Elliott Shore-Parks, who does a great job covering the Eagles for WIP in Philadelphia, he was with Bickley and Murata this morning and gave quite frankly an honest, straightforward take regarding Josh Sweat.
I think he is a very solid player and at times can be a very good player. He's been probably the Eagles' most consistent pass rusher, I would say, since coming to the team. He plays almost every week. He certainly has games where, as you saw in the Super Bowl, he can take over and, impact the quarterback. He's always had good advanced rushing numbers in terms of hurries, pressures, quarterback hits. So I think it's a very good signing for the Cardinals. I think in free agency, you always overpay. I don't think you ever really get a bargain in free agency, or at least if you do, you don't find out until really the season's over. So I don't think Josh Sweat is probably worth the money he was paid, but that's the case with all free agents. And I think that, he's a very good addition.
That's the part that I'm going to stick with the most at the end there that he mentioned is no free agent is actually worth their money until they go out and prove their worth. And the only way that you get a bargain is by waiting long enough, paying them late, and then they go out and have spectacular season. The immediate example that comes to mind, Zach Bond signed to the Eagles on a 1-year prove-it deal, and he was top 5 in AP Defensive Player of the Year. He was intercepting passes in the Super Bowl. He was first team all-defense for the AP, and then he was rewarded this offseason with a 3-year extension. This, on the other hand, is the Cardinals had a desperation for an edge rusher. He was the best one available. He's got connections with the staff that is here. You might as well give him a good, solid dollar amount and prop him up to be their guy, and maybe he becomes that elite-level edge rusher of types that we've seen across this league.
Yeah, and going more deepy dive into the numbers, I mean, I pulled up a PFF graph and take these for, with a grain of salt because this is, entered by play. You never know how these things are entered, but the graph basically is grade over expectation when double teamed versus double team percentage. And on this graph, I'll tell you, actually, Zaven Collins apparently had a higher double team percentage than Josh Sweat last year. So by these numbers, if they're that accurate, I don't know, but apparently Josh Sweat wasn't double teamed that much, but he grades much better than Zaven Collins when he is double teamed, grade over expectation. So there's a lot of that kind of detail where it's like, okay, if you start getting double teamed more because you're the clear number one guy when teams play the Cardinals, are you going to be able to handle it? Maybe, maybe not. We're going to have to see, and I do think the context around him matters. Like if they're blitzing Mac Wilson from his inside linebacker spot often, or Budda Baker, does that help free up Josh Sweat? I don't know. Do they actually add on that D-line where we're probably going to talk about that in a little bit and really just cause more problems? Does Darius Robinson take a step forward? That kind of stuff. So that stuff's all going to matter at the end of the day too.
I think that's the part that I'm most curious about is if he was not double teamed as much in Philadelphia, because you considered probably the one he had to double team was Jalen Carter, who was just an absolute game wrecker for Philadelphia in the middle. If Josh Sweat is going to be double teamed so much on the Cardinals, not just because they see him as an immediate threat, but who else does that benefit? I like that you brought up that point in particular, because it's so easy at the end of a season to look at somebody's counting stats and say, oh, well, they barely got into the backfield. But you do the deep dive and you realize, oh, well, they were double teamed most of the time. And that led to this guy's immediate production. And now he's seen as one of the top artists. And then that allows other offenses to game plan differently, and then that frees up the guy that you spent all this money on. Then he gets back into the massive counting stats category to the point that you just have two amazing options as a result of one person kind of seesawing all the way to this side, so it frees up the other side of the saw, and then back and forth sort of thing. Or maybe he's just amazing at double teams, and we'll find out the hard way.
Yeah, I mean, go back in Cardinals history, it's, when Chandler Jones was having really great seasons in that run there, Marcus Golden was going to have an awesome season when he was healthy. That's how this stuff works. And I think he probably had one of his best seasons with Chandler Jones on the other side. So I think that all matters.
So the other aspect of this that we'll touch on quickly is this is just the type of image boost I think that this franchise needed after, all the discussions that we had throughout the season of they have $20 million left over in cap space that they're just not using, or close to $20 million to be fair. Why are they not using it? They could be filling it with at least a couple more guys on the defensive side of the ball. Well, the first thing that they did as soon as they were able to was they went out and got the best defensive players available at his position. So if nothing else, they have heard the cries of the fans, and just as importantly, they probably see this season as a chance for them to be at the top of their division at the least by the time that this year is done.
Yeah, fair or not, the fan base wanted to know if this regime would spend. Fair or not, they wanted to see if a top-notch free agent would come to Arizona, I think, because it had just been a while where Arizona attacked in free agency like that. So I think from both sides of that, just like the image, perception, whatever you want to call it, that it says a lot that they did it. Again, we'll see the results, but it says a lot right now.